Welcome to the Caretakers, a show where we'll talk about what it means to be a caretaker on Earth. Whether we're intentional about it or not, we're all caretakers. We've been entrusted to take care of our family, our friends, our environment, and ourselves. We'll talk about strategies for taking care of yourself, mentally, physically, and spiritually. We'll talk about what it means to take care of others, from your neighbor across the street to the neighbor across the globe. This is going to be a journey of self-discovery and reflection, and we hope you join us as we strive to be the best caretakers we can be. Welcome to the Caretakers Podcast. I am joined today by Nazima Qureshi, who is a registered dietitian and nutritionist with a Master's of Public Health. She's a two-time author, one of a food journal entitled Eat Better, Feel Better, Live Better, and the Healthy Ramadan Guide, which I have a copy of here, and I bought myself back in 2020 when it came out. She's been featured in CNN, CBC, Canadian Living, Self Magazine, Globe and Mail, and New York Times. Nazima, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you today, obviously with Ramadan just around the corner. A lot of people are starting to think about how am I going to eat during Ramadan, which is, sometimes a weird thing to think about. Right. But in terms of getting prepped, so like even today at my house, we were talking about, all right, when are we going to go grocery shopping? What are we going to buy? How are we going to meal plan and all that kind of stuff so that we have the time and energy to do the things that we want to do in Ramadan. So before we start talking about Ramadan and the nutrition and the health that we're going to talk about there, I want to go back a little bit to your childhood memories and how a lot of our childhood memories are sometimes tied to food. Like some of the things I remember waking up, my mom making breakfast or making my favorite foods. What do you remember about food in your childhood?
Well, in our household, my parents were immigrants. They came to Canada when I was a year old. So for me, a lot of the food was very ethnic. And it was very, for instance, the first time I had a peanut butter jelly sandwich was I was 18 years old. Wow. So I like peanut butter was just never a part of our household because it was a very foreign ingredient to my parents, so they would never pick it up, right? So growing up, just to give you an idea, that's how our food was very ethnic. Even the lunches my mom would pack me would be, which now are trendy, but back then it would be like a kebab sandwich, which was very aromatic, and I'd be embarrassed of it, to be completely honest. And at home, so very ethnic food, curries, rice, a lot of home cooking. And I also remember now we have one-stop shop grocery stores, but it would be our weekends would be, okay, we have to go to 3 different grocery stores. It would be, the regular grocery store for the produce, and then the halal meat, and then we have to go to the ethnic grocery store. So that was it was very, very ethnic. And then it wasn't until I was old enough where I'm like, okay, I want to try peanut butter. Let me bring this. And I want to try right. And so that's kind of where I started, when I was old enough to start experimenting with food. But before that, it was very, very ethnic cuisine that I grew up on.
Right. Yeah. And I had a similar experience, growing up. I remember you have that little bit of embarrassment when you're a kid. Yeah. And you don't get it, right? You don't get it. But then when you get older, you have a longing for that food.
Yes.
And it teaches you something about culture.
Of course.
Right? The food is so intertwined with the culture that it's important that, our kids, get that mix of both, right? It's a little bit more difficult. Yeah. I find the stuff that we're cooking at home is pushing a little bit too much towards the North American cuisine. Yeah. And sometimes it's we have to make an effort to go back a little bit.
Exactly,
give them that culture. And so what made you interested in pursuing a career as a registered dietitian and nutritionist?
So actually, when I was in high school, so my dad has type 2 diabetes. And so at that time I had gone to the dietitian with him. I didn't know what a dietitian was. So I remember she gave all these recommendations, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I came home and I was looking through all the stuff. So that's kind of what sparked the interest. Right. But what was interesting is when we came home, my dad didn't follow any of those recommendations. Mm-hmm. And at that time I was way too young. But then once I started school, I was like, wait, all of those recommendations, they did not account for any of his cultural foods, right? I remember one very specific thing that the dietitian had said was have a glass of milk with your dinner. And I remember even in the office, I was like, my dad's not going to do that. Curry and rice with a glass of milk, that's not going to happen. So that's kind of what sparked it. And then even when I was going through my degree, I always had in the back of my mind, like, okay, but what about the cultural foods? Like, this is very, like, the nutrition information is very in accordance to westernized food.
Right.
But I was like, okay, but what about the cultural food? Like, why do we have to completely eliminate it in order to eat healthy? So that's something that kind of sparked my interest.
Right. And I think growing up, I got to a phase later in probably like when I was like in my early 20s, where I went to the total opposite of extreme to say, like, our cultural food is not healthy at all. I'm going to stop eating it entirely.
Yeah.
Where when I thought about it, it was actually how we set up our plates.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was making it unhealthy, and not necessarily the food itself. Because then you start looking into like Mediterranean diets and that kind of thing. It's like, this is all the stuff we eat.
Yeah.
It's just
or like lentil soup, which is like trendy now, but it's like, this is a part of our culture, right?
Right.
Whether it's South Asian or Middle Eastern, like these are the cultural foods are not the issue.
Right. It's how we set it up sometimes.
Exactly.
That can be the problem. Okay. And not only have you done your work as a dietitian, nutritionist one-on-one, but you've also set up a pretty big online platform to do that. What made you want to start putting stuff out online?
Well, one thing when it comes to health, well, now I feel like we have a lot more representation, but when I started, so it's been almost, I would say 8 to 8-ish years. One of the things I thought about when I first like graduated, and I was like, there's no one that looks like me that is talking about, cultural food. It's when you're looking at health and nutrition, going back to your point, when you think about health and nutrition, you're like, okay, we have to eliminate everything in our house, remove the culture. And in order for me to eat healthy, it's like, grilled chicken and like broccoli, right? And so one of my things was like, okay, there's like a huge gap in the nutrition and health wellness space where not only do people not see anyone that looks like me talking about it, but they don't see their food represented, right? And so there's this ideology where people are like, okay, in order for me to eat healthy, I have to give up all of my culture. And that's not sustainable, right? We see that where it's like, you can do that for a short period of time, but then you go back to go back to the
it's not necessarily desirable either.
It's
like,
not
just to give up your culture as well.
It's really not. It's really not. So yeah, so that's kind of where I started, where I was like, okay, I want to kind of showcase. I first of all, I wanted to be this figure where people would be like, hey, that's like someone that looks like me, and I can resonate with that. And then also move away from some of the very superficial imaging and messaging that comes from, that nutrition and wellness space. So that's kind of where I just started posting the content.
Right. And so I want to harp on that point about the superficial part and talk about intention.
Yeah.
So intention is at the core of everything we do, right? Whether it's food or anything else. And so when we talk about eating healthy, can we talk about why we're doing that? What are some good intentions to have behind that?
Yeah, for sure. So with 2020 is when we kind of launched the Healthy Muslims, which was, so my husband's the co-founder. He's kind of the fitness side of it. I'm the nutrition side of it. And so one of our things is thinking about us as Muslims, where does health and wellness fit into that, right? And a lot of times, once again, it goes back to our cultural food where we're like, oh no, I'm good. Like, I don't want to, I'm happy with my life. And we think that there's a huge disconnect where we're like, oh, we don't need to lose weight. I'm happy. But then if you actually kind of look at it from, an Islamic standpoint, our bodies are, number one, a huge amana, right? So we need to be taking care of our bodies. And then the link between our physical health to our spiritual health, right? So if we're taking care of our bodies physically, we have more strength to then continue spiritually, just even day to day, being able to continue our roles and responsibilities that we have in various capacities as, Muslim men and women. And so I think it's really like, as Muslims, nutrition and fitness should be even more important in our community, right? And unfortunately, it gets put on the back burner where it's like, oh no, we don't really care about the superficial. So yeah, so I think it's really going back to the intention. And that's something we talk about with our members a lot, where we're like, okay, yes, you may have goals, and it's okay to have, the weight loss goals and things like that. But those goals are not going to, for many people, the reality is they're not strong enough to make a lifelong change. Right. We have to go back to kind of the deeper why. And the why is going back to the intention. So like for me personally, me being a mom of 3 kids, like that's a huge why for me, where I'm like, I want to be able to keep up with them. I want to be able to, be a happy mom, a happy wife, right? We don't the reality is mothers are burnt out. Mm-hmm. Why is it? There's a huge connection between how we're eating, how we're treating our bodies as well, right? So yeah, I think that intention is super important, and linking it back to our spiritual whys as well makes it more powerful. And even when you don't feel like losing weight, you still continue. You're like, okay, this is more meaningful. And even going back to Ramadan, as we go into the month of Ramadan, it's, it's not just, oh, here's a weight loss plan, right? A lot of times people are like, oh, can I lose weight off the Healthy Ramadan guide? Yes, you can, but there's more to it. It's like, we want you to follow this so you feel more energized so you can do more ibadah. Like that's the why for Ramadan. And then extending that after Ramadan as well, we want you to just essentially be better Muslims. And if you take care of your body, you're going to be able to do that.
Right. No, I mean, that was a shift that I had when I was, and this is specific to exercise, is I had this shift eventually where my mindset switched from wanting to look a certain way to wanting to feel a certain way in terms of my mobility, in terms of my health, in terms of my, just going up and down the stairs. Like I didn't want to feel out of breath going up the stairs if I'm going to play with my daughter or going to the park or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's the sticking factor to make you go back.
Yeah.
Because if it's superficial, then it's a lot easier to lose that goal and say, you know what, I don't care anymore, and just move away. So I'm glad we start with intention. And I know we called out some of the intentions to avoid, but is there anything in particular that you want to talk more about on that?
Yeah, I think I guess the weight loss is the most common one, right? I think it's not a bad thing to have a weight loss intention, but it's how you go about it. So if you're gonna, weight loss, and then it's linking to extreme restriction, and you're miserable, you're like, you don't want, you're going through it, and then you see people, for a short, maybe they're able to stick to it for 2 to 3 months even, but then the second something life happens, which does happen, you kind of, you're going backwards, right? So that's an indication where you weren't able to actually make a lifestyle change. And then it's a lot, like people go through the yo-yo dieting, right? Where it's like they spent years just losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight. So that's why it's kind of shifting more to lifestyle change. I feel like sometimes it's a little bit fluffy terms, and it's not as like, fancy as like these extreme, like, superfoods and this. But this is the essential core to it. It's if you make a lifestyle change, you can lose the weight, but then keep it off and feel better. So I think that's really the key, is how you go about it. We will see a lot of like various diets kind of pop up every few years that are super trendy. If you're able to do that long term, great. But if it's something you're only going to do, even if it's a couple months and short term, we've all had people in our community where they lose weight and they swear by a specific diet, and then you see them a year later and you're like, what happened? And it's not sustainable. So I think that's the piece. It's have a goal, even if it's superficial, but then tie it back to can I do this a year from now, 6 years from now? Is this a true lifestyle change? Right.
And one of the things I really like, I saw it on your website, was that instead of focusing on restricting yourself, you're teaching your clients which foods to be adding to improve their lives. Yeah. I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. Why do you look at it in that way?
Absolutely. Because I think, once again, as soon as people think about healthy eating, the first thing they think about is, I have to go like throw everything out. All right. Okay. First of all, that's wasteful. We're not like, we don't, right. But, and then you just keep focusing on everything you can't have. Right. So say sugar is like a very common one, right? So like usually January 1st hits and everyone's like, no sugar. But all you think about is no sugar. And and then the second you get like someone brings it and you're like, that's it, game over.
Right.
So instead, like flip side, let's be like, you have a sweet tooth. I have a sweet tooth. So I'm like, I have chocolate very regularly in my life. I will be very honest with that. But I'm like, how can I incorporate that in a healthy way? So healthier recipes. So now I don't feel deprived. Whereas if I were to give myself a restriction, I'm not allowed to have chocolate this month. Oh my God, I'd feel horrible, right? So everyone so we're instead focusing on what we can add. Another one would be very common, like sugary drinks. If you say, no sugary drinks. Instead, let's flip, how much water are you consuming right now? Probably not a lot, because you're consuming so many of the sugary drinks, right? So, can you focus on this week, every day get 2 liters of water? You can focus on that goal, and then you're going to reduce the sugary drinks. You don't have time. You don't have space to do that. So it's just kind of shifting, and you naturally will start eliminating those foods. Rather than, a lot of times people go into, I need to start eating healthy. What are all the things I can't have anymore? And that's all they think about. And I've had members where they're like, they've done it in the past and that's all they think. And they actually come in almost wanting me to be like, you can't have this and this. But I'm like, let's be more positive about it. And they naturally reduce those things. Right. So that's kind of just that mindset shift there.
Right. So with Ramadan coming up, there's basically, I'll call it 3 main meals, maybe, for people.
3? We're talking
Yeah.
about 3 meals. Okay.
Yeah, 3. I'll tell you
Okay.
why. So starting with suhoor. So just to give some context for people. So suhoor is the meal that Muslims eat before they begin their fast. For us here where we are, it's going to be around 6 a.m. in the morning throughout the month. So what are we looking for in the perfect suhoor?
The perfect suhoor. So number 1 is do wake up for suhoor.
Yes.
So once we've gotten there, so I find there's really 2 types of people. One that have the breakfast type foods, and then the other that have the dinner type foods.
Okay.
So both are okay as long as we got the right components.
Right.
Okay. So when you have kind of, now if you look at kind of traditional, whether it's breakfast or dinner, if it's very simple carbs, bowl of cereal or like rice, right? Like those. So by the time you wake up, you're like already feeling hungry because those carbs have digested really quickly. So what we want to do is at suhoor, this is your last opportunity to nourish your body. Okay. So it's not about eating as much as you can, right? That's not the mentality we're going in. We're going in with, okay, let's get the right foods at the right amount so you feel more energized throughout the day. So that would be, protein is going to help you feel a lot more fuller and also maintain kind of that muscle so you don't lose a lot of muscle throughout the month. Getting protein because we have limited opportunities to eat enough food. Making sure we have enough protein at those opportunities is very important. So suhoor, protein. So if it's like dinner type foods, the chicken, fish, things. And then breakfast type foods, Greek yogurt, eggs, cottage cheese. Like those are all great options. Right. And then next is some sort of healthy fat. So if you're cooking, the healthy fat that you're cooking with, so say like olive oil, that's enough. Or you can do like, avocados and nuts and seeds and stuff that can kind of increase that. And then you want to pair it with a more complex carbohydrate, right? So these are things that instead of the cereal, like oats or, quinoa, bulgur, whole grain breads, these are going to help you feel a lot more full. And so what that's going to happen, if we think about in our bodies, it will kind of release into our bloodstream. Those blood sugars will slowly go up and it'll come down slowly. Okay. So that's not to say that you're not going to feel hungry in your fast. Like, right, we are going to essentially feel hungry, but it's just not going to be like a crash. We don't want the crash. We don't want it to spike in our blood sugars and then crashing down, which often happens with like a bowl of cereal. Right. So that's kind of what you want to kind of pair together. And then of course, water intake, trying to aim, I would say at least half a liter. If you can get up to a liter, then that would be great.
Right. So for me personally, I'm not a big suhoor guy.
Yeah.
I generally, for years, I just woke up, drank some water, prayed, and went back to sleep. I'm starting to get more into it. I did use the overnight oats recipes last year from the Healthy Ramadan guide, and I thought those were great. Because for me, because I'm not waking up that much earlier, I just don't have the time to be cooking and do like a full meal. I want to have something that's ready to go. I can eat it quickly and do what I need to do. So can you talk a little bit more about that convenience factor and how you can set yourself up for the week to have a proper suhoor without a bunch of time? Yeah,
for sure. Well, it's funny that I feel like when we were younger and our parents it makes you appreciate our parents, how they used to have a whole spread of food. And now when we are the adults in our own household, we're like, okay, I'm not going to do that. But that's, so, the overnight oats is actually one of our go-tos as well, because it includes all the components without it's not a large quantity of food. Right. And you can prep it ahead of time. So that's the thing. A lot of times when I'm like, okay, protein, carbs, all this, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of components. Right. So it doesn't have to be a large amount of food, nor does it have to be, you have to be awake for a whole hour to prep everything. So for us, we prepare the overnight oats. It just works really well. Like for instance, for my husband, he has higher protein needs. So I'll put like an extra scoop of protein powder, for instance. Okay. So that really helps. But yeah, just prepping a little bit more in advance. One thing to keep in mind with Ramadan is your schedule might look different. So say like outside of Ramadan, maybe Sundays you're prepping for the week may work. But in Ramadan, considering weekends are more social, we have our Taraweeh prayers, maybe like the Sunday prep may not work. So it might be like post-Taraweeh, like figure out the timings that will prep so that you're not kind of left scrambling. Right. I personally like to do like right after Iftar when we're kind of cleaning up, let's just do the quick prep for Suhoor for the next couple of days and we're kind of good to go. But that will make a big difference. Like I know you said you don't like waking up for Suhoor, but that overnight oats and then drinking enough water, like you'll be good to go. And I'm sure have you noticed a difference between waking up for suhoor and not?
Yeah. No, I always woke up, but it was like I would just wake up, drink water, pray, and go back to sleep. Like it was very quick.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even eat anything at all. It was just water basically.
Wow. So then have you noticed a difference when you actually have
Yes.
for suhoor?
Yeah. No, I definitely had more energy. I'll say that. I had more energy throughout the day, which was great.
Yeah.
And so on the opposite side of that, some things to avoid during suhoor. I know you mentioned the example of cereal, some of those things that are going to give you that crash.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about coffee. What do you think about your coffee at suhoor?
Yeah. So, okay. So it depends. So this year our suhoor is actually pretty late, right? Like I feel like in the previous years we're like, it felt like in the middle of the night. This year, if you are kind of staying up, you could do coffee.
Right.
However, if you're going to go back to sleep, honestly, if you're going to go back to sleep for less than an hour, I would say just stay up. Like just adjust your schedule and then do the coffee. Like you can just stay up. But the problem is if you're drinking coffee and then trying to go back to sleep, your quality of sleep is going to be horrible. Right? So even some people that are like, I can drink a cup of coffee and fall asleep, but the quality of sleep will be impacted. So also coffee does dry your mouth. It doesn't dehydrate you, but it'll dry your mouth out. So as long as it's not the last thing you drink, so don't end your suhoor on it.
Set yourself up.
Yeah. So maybe have it earlier and then make sure you're drinking a little bit of water. You should be okay. But once again, if you're going back to sleep, probably avoid that coffee in the morning.
Right. Any other foods that people should generally just avoid during suhoor?
Yeah, so I would say like anything that's really heavy, like if it's more like very oily, more deep fried. If you have like leftovers and you're like, oh, let me just eat the fried foods for suhoor, probably not a good idea. You're gonna feel extremely thirsty throughout your fast. And the simple carbs, right? Those are things that people don't realize, and those are very common breakfast foods. Those are like quick, like for instance, like a croissant, right? Like something really quick. Honestly, it's by the time you wake up, like by 9 a.m., you're probably gonna be starving and you're gonna have a crash. So avoid those sugary, simple carbs. Some people will be like, oh, I don't eat sugary cereal. I'll just have like cornflakes or something there because it's not sweet, but it's still simple carbs. So what's happening is your blood sugar is literally spiking and then it's crashing. So the crash is probably happening right when you're starting your day anyway. So really avoid those simple carbs.
Right. Okay. So obviously we're not going to talk about lunch.
No, we're hopefully skipping on that. Okay.
But iftar, okay? So iftar, just again for some context, that's the meal that we're eating when you break your fast. This year for us, it's going to be around 7:30 on average throughout the month. I want to start, before we talk about the foods, what's happening inside our bodies when we break our fast?
For sure. So I think like as we get closer to our fast, like we really get hungrier, right? Because it's the senses. We start smelling things. We are like, our bodies are like, okay, we know. And I feel like by, a few days in, our bodies are hungry at suhoor and our bodies are hungry at iftar. We adjust really quickly. And so one thing we need to kind of identify is that extreme hunger often leads to the extreme overeating that happens like within minutes of breaking your fast.
Right.
So that's kind of what we want to be mindful of. Now, there's a hadith where we want to consume when we're consuming food or consuming anything, it's 1/3 food, 1/3 water, 1/3 air. So I often think, I'm like, how does someone know what is 1/3 of our stomachs, right? And so from a scientific standpoint, it takes 20 minutes for your body to register that you're feeling full. So basically, when you're eating, there's like a signal that goes like through your nervous system to your brain, and it takes 20 minutes for it to be like, okay, I'm full. So now, if someone's eating extremely fast, those signals are not kind of syncing up. So you're eating a lot faster than your body's registering that you're full. Right. So what happens post-iftar is everyone has like a corner in their room where they're just like, they can't move. Afterwards, you're like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that much, right? And then the next day happens again, and then you overeat. So what we need to do is kind of slow down so we're syncing up with our bodies. And so we're more in line with the 1/3 food, 1/3 water, 1/3 air, right? Essentially, I feel like the modern terminology is mindful eating, right? If you think about it. Okay, so when we're opening our fast, because our senses have made us like so hungry and we consume so much before going to pray, and then we sit down to pray and then we have our dinner meal, right? And so we're eating faster than our body can register that we're getting full. So that's what results in multiple plates of food. So we need to slow that down. So instead, when you break your fast, the best ideal situation is dates, water. If you want to have a little bit of fruit, go pray. That's like the hardest thing to do, is just go pray. Don't eat anything else. Just go pray. then sit down and then have your meal. Because if you note it, like the prayer will be about 15 minutes or so from the time you've broken your fast. So your body now has gotten a little bit of water, a little bit of natural sugars from the date and fruit. So your body will start being like, okay, I have food. Like I'm okay. I'm not in a crisis where I need to eat as much as possible.
Right.
So when you sit down after Maghrib, you're still going to be hungry, but you'll notice it's not like this extreme, oh my God, I need to eat everything I possibly can in front of me.
So I did that last year.
Yeah.
Last year I committed to doing that where I was like, okay, I'm just going to have some bowl of fruit, some water. I'm going to go pray. I'm going to come back and eat.
That's awesome.
I wasn't successful 100 of the time.
It's hard.
But it's like 25 out of the 30 days I was able to do it.
Yeah.
And that made a huge difference for me in terms of how I felt and how much I ate.
Exactly.
It made a huge difference for me. So I started following that tip from the book.
That's great. And I think, so if you think about like different levels of changes you want to make in your life, so that is a very easy one without even changing what you're eating, right? So without whatever you're preparing, if you just kind of slow down, it'll make a big difference, right? So we're not even talking about the what. It's just about, hey, break your fast, go pray, and then sit down to eat. And that'll make such a big difference.
Right. And we had Sheikh Adnan on a couple weeks ago, and his thing was actually don't even eat.
Yeah.
You're going to have water, date, and a little bit of soup, and then go pray Maghrib, and then go pray Isha, and then pray Taraweeh, and then you can eat something, and you can eat whatever leftovers are free.
That's like the Hufaz usually use that method, right?
His perspective was more of a spiritual one, where it's like, you're now fasting, not thinking about the food.
Yeah.
You're fasting for a different reason, and you're sort of not distracted by Maghrib. And Maghrib's not going to save you. It's not your salvation, is the words that he used. So
exactly. If you're ready to take it to that level.
Yeah, exactly. I think you can build it. You can build it. You can take step by step, right?
Yeah. One thing we do in our home to make it easier for us is like, I'll prepare the food and it's like in the oven. It's not like on our dinner table.
Okay.
So it's not there. So we'll have like fruit and dates and water. That's the only thing on the table. Okay. So then we pray, and then I'll pull it out, and it's like warm. Because when it's all in front of you, it's really hard to make that decision to right? You're like fighting your nafs at another level. So we just kind of just have dates, water, fruit. Everyone's around. Like that's actually, so that's our new family tradition. Like my kids don't know the tradition of fried foods and everything, unless they know on the weekends, they go to like, grandparents. But in our household, they're excited about the fruit. They're like, what fruit are we cutting today? So that's really nice, where it's not kind of a spread of food and then the food's getting cold and stuff. So we can just enjoy, pray our Maghrib. We're not rushing through, come back, and then we're pulling out the food.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
One thing we started doing in our house too as well, is we used to always bring if we cooked in a pot or something, we'd bring the whole pot to the table.
Yeah.
And what happens if you do that is you'll eat your first plate, and then the pot's there, and you're sort of either like picking at it or you're putting in seconds right away. Yeah. Just having that separation where it's like it's in the kitchen still, and now we've left the kitchen. We've brought our plate, and this is what I'm going to eat.
That's your portion size,
That's the portion size. That made a huge difference for me, because that's not the way it was growing up. Like,
you just kind of eat. You don't even know how much you're eating, right? Because you just kind of make your plate and you just keep going. Right. So usually for us, actually, one thing I do is I use a measuring cup to spoon the rice. The serving spoon? Because I'm like, even the estimation, even though I have a pretty good estimation, I'm like, it's just helpful. So we use a measuring cup. So then I know what my portion is. I know what Bilal's is, and it really helps. So this is like all year round. Anytime you'll just see me with the measuring cup instead of a serving spoon.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so what should our plates look like in terms of, if I'm looking at the plate, like percentage-wise, we talked about carbs, protein, fats. What does it look like in terms of a percentage?
For sure. So in, I guess the Iftar dinner time, right?
Yeah.
So it's, because we've been fasting, we can adjust it a little bit, but generally, say a third-ish is your protein.
Okay.
A quarter is your carbohydrates, and about half is your vegetables. Okay.
Right. Which is not the way that any of us.
No, because it's usually like full plate is the carbs or the rice, and then it's like a little bit of curry, a little bit of meat. Right? And then vegetables are non-existent.
Right.
So that's kind of the adjustment. But I think the biggest question people get when I say that is they're like, oh, but I'm going to get hungry, because they're so focused on the rice portion being reduced. But when you actually increase the protein and vegetables, it's a lot more filling. The rice, white carbs, you can eat like plates and plates of it. You don't actually ever feel full. You just have to kind of be like, all right, I think I'm done. But you don't actually physically feel full. But with protein and vegetables, you'll notice you actually get more full. So that's kind of where, even though it looks less, it's actually not less, because you're increasing the protein and veggies there.
Right. And I want to ask you about that hunger. So I eat my first plate.
Yeah.
And I'm still hungry.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah. So once again, in Ramadan, because you fasted, you can increase the portion a little bit more. But instead of going for the rice and kind of the more carb things, focus more on the protein and vegetables. So protein as well. You can even like calculate your protein needs, and you'll realize you actually need to eat a little bit more of the protein at dinner time. Right. So go for seconds, focusing more on the protein and veggies, not the carbs. And then that should be fine.
Right. So a lot of people are going to be listening to this and be like, all right, I'm good to go. This is my game plan during the week. What about the weekends?
Yeah.
Right? The weekends when you're invited over to somebody's house for iftar, or you're going to your parents' house or your friends, or whatever the case may be. They're no longer in control of what's being prepared. And generally when we have these big events, there's probably more, I don't know if extravagant is the right word, but more like feasty type foods that are at these events. So what do you do in that situation? You're invited somewhere to eat, or, you're going to a big gathering.
Yeah. So I think it depends on where you're going. Like if it's, for instance, parents' house, like for us, we usually just go to parents. We're not doing a lot of social iftars. But for that, I do have that relationship where I usually bring the healthy, like I'll bring the salad. I'm like, I know there's gonna be no vegetables there. I know there'll be protein and carbs, right? We know there's gonna be protein and carbs. So if it's a smaller situation where you have that relationship, where you can just bring the salad for everyone, not your own, not your own little portion, right? And I think that's another thing that's so exclusive to our Muslim community is we share love through food, right? And that's what makes it, so you never want to go in and be like, I'm on a healthy eating plan, I'm not going to touch your food. Like that's so disrespectful. Right. You're being hurtful, right? To our elders and our loved ones. Right. So don't do that. Like just because you're eating healthy doesn't mean you need to impose it on your loved ones. Right. You can kind of be a role model, but you don't want to be rude. Right. So actually it's interesting. A couple of years ago, my mother-in-law actually exclusively used the Healthy Ramadan guide and followed the recipes. So she'd be like, okay, I'm making this one. So that was like amazing for us. But we never told her, but she was just like, okay, yeah, this is great. So she'll have the days, and now she does know that we don't eat fried foods and stuff. So she'll make an effort. Now, if you're in a situation where you don't have the option, or you're going to like a masjid or a bigger community iftar where you're kind of stuck, just slow it down with the mindful eating practices, right? So don't eat as soon as you break your fast, right? Because what usually happens is there's like appetizers, a whole spread of appetizers before your Maghrib prayer. That's going to be almost like the equivalent of maybe 2 to 3 meals, right? Because like if you look at one, let's say like a fried like samosa or a spring roll, right? That can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. We actually don't know how much because it depends how long someone's frying it. So how much the oil is being absorbed. So one fried item can be 200 to 300 calories. No one's eating one. Right. You're eating a whole plate. So just with that, you're probably getting about 2,000 to 3,000, like maybe 1,500 to 3,000 calories, depending on how. This is just before you've even touched dinner. Right. So if you're in a place, just have, dates and water and go pray your Maghrib and then sit down. Now, when you sit down, make your plate, and that is your plate. So you do have to kind of, rather than just, okay, let me just portion out, let me just keep eating whatever I want and have multiple plates, and do a scan of what's kind of available and choose. You don't have to take everything, right? Like after, and this is what is the essence of Ramadan? Is it to fast just so that we can feast for 30 days straight? No. Right? It's not, right? So like reset our intentions as well. Like it's just, forget the health from an Islamic standpoint. What was the point of us fasting all day if we're going to consume even more calories than we would in a regular day? Right. So make your plate and then follow kind of, okay, protein, quarter, carbs. So carbs, now this includes your rice, your bread, your fried items. That's the quarter of your plate, right? Not, okay, I'm gonna have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Choose your carbs. So usually I'll be like, okay, choose if you want to do rice or your bread. Or if you want to do your fried items, then that's your carbs, right? It's not a little bit of everything. Right. And then usually vegetables are missing. So in this situation, increase the protein a little bit. And if there's fruit, then at that point, just have the fruit.
Got it. Okay. So I'll be a little bit difficult.
Okay.
Growing up, we had samosas, spring rolls, Vimto, to a point where it feels like my fast is not accepted if I don't have a samosa or a spring roll. Yeah. If I have to have it. Yeah. What's the advice you have?
So every year I share this infographic on my social media. Okay. And it's this like visual representation. And so I did 3 samosas per day, right? So if you do 3 samosas per day, at the end of Ramadan, that's 90 samosas. Okay. So, but no one's doing just 3 fried items. So it's probably like 3, 4. So basically at the end of Ramadan, each individual person is consuming hundreds of fried items.
Right.
So that visual where I'm like, it's funny because I'll have people message me and be like, I was going to have a samosa, but I remembered that. So I didn't. And I'm like, there's samosa like confessional. So they'll be like, it's day 15. I've only had like 3 samosas. And it's like it's a good feeling because you're fighting your nafs after opening up your fast, right? Like it's not haram for us, but it's like we're taking a next step where you're like, okay, I'm going to fight my nafs and be like, okay, I don't need to consume. Now, if you feel like you need to have it, it's a part of limit to 1.
Right.
1 fried item a day. 1 fried item a day equals 30 at the end of the month, which is still a lot. If you think compared to outside of Ramadan, if I gave you 30 samosas, I'm like, all right, this is you're like, that's a lot, right? But something happens to us in Ramadan, we're consuming hundreds of fried items. So if you can, 1 fried item if you must. If you want to take it a step further, limit it to the weekends. So at least you're like, okay, Monday through Thursday, we don't have it at home, but when we go out on the weekends, okay, I'll have it, right? If your mom's making it, you're like, okay, don't want to hurt her. Hurt her feelings, you'll have it, right? You can take it. So, and then, so that'll reduce it significantly, just being more mindful. A lot of prep for many households is like stocking their freezers with the fried items. But then I'm like, okay, it's like 500-600. And I'm like, it's done at the end of Ramadan. Like it went inside of our bodies. Like that's really something to think about. And also the big jugs of oil, the vegetable oil, and it's done in 1 month. I'm like, that's went inside of our bodies, right? So something to reflect on.
Right. Okay. So we talked about, I mentioned at the beginning 3 meals, and you're a little bit surprised.
What is the 3rd meal?
Post-Taraweeh.
Okay.
After Taraweeh, if you need a little snack.
A little snack that becomes
So you've and again, just for a little bit of context here, so Taraweeh is a prayer that Muslims do exclusively in Ramadan. It's a night prayer that for us this year will end around 10:30 p.m. I'm guessing. And so some people like to eat something light after Taraweeh or before they go to sleep.
Light.
Unless you're doing the Sheikh Adnan method, then you're having and then you're free to eat whatever you want. I think if you do that. What are some good snacks we can have after Taraweeh?
Yeah, so I think sometimes this and this year Taraweeh will be ending a little bit earlier, so you almost feel like you have a little bit more time. So I think there is almost like families have different traditions at this time. So sometimes they eat the leftovers, they'll have like the fried items and they'll have it. Some families will make like desserts at this time. One thing to keep in mind is what you eat at nighttime is going to impact how you feel the next day.
Okay. In sleep-wise or just?
No, like your fast.
Oh, okay.
How you feel in your fast the next day. Like so if you think about Ramadan, when you start getting like a few days in, you have a hard time realizing what's the start or end of the day. It's just like kind of cycles through, right? So what you're eating at nighttime is going to have a huge impact on how you feel in your fast the next day. Okay. So that's something to be very mindful of. Like if you've ever had like fried items or like you'll feel very thirsty the next day, like pizza and all that, the wings, the heavy stuff, you'll feel so thirsty the next day. Your energy will be very, very low. So going back to our intention, if we think about, okay, how do we have a better fast? Resetting, okay, what is our evenings going to look like? Now, that's not to say don't eat anything. You can still actually have, so actually the book has some post-iftar snacks. So if you're more on the sweeter end, you can do like more date energy bites, kind of prep some things that are available to you. You can do like shakes, like mango date shakes, right? Kind of like smoothie type. Essentially, we do want to kind of get a little bit more protein in at that time and a little bit more fiber. And also consume the remainder amount of the water, right? So we need to catch up on any water intake. That's the time to do it. But really avoid the heavy fried foods at that time and the sugary things because it's going to impact your fast the next day, like significantly.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know the reason I asked about sleep is because I noticed that if I eat close to sleeping, I have worse sleep.
If it's heavy foods,
Throughout the year, obviously Ramadan it's a little bit harder to do that, but throughout the year I'm trying to cut it out, stop eating earlier and earlier in the day just to improve the sleep aspect. Yeah, so I think that is a bit more individualized because some people actually sleep better when they have like something small, but not heavy eating. That's the thing. You don't want to have like a heavy meal right before you go to sleep. Right. And at that time specifically, because I'm like the way I think about it is if you've already eaten at suhoor, you've eaten at iftar, it could be very easy that this last snack puts you over the edge in terms of overeating. So how do we make sure that the things that we're eating at that time are not putting us over that limit that we've set for ourselves?
Yeah, it honestly should be a very small snack. Like it's like an energy bite or like a little bit of fruit. It's not a whole meal. Like it's not a whole thing. So it shouldn't be large portions because you're right. It's going to really put you over the edge. And it'll become overeating. So it's really shouldn't. And if you're kind of making sure you're getting enough water, that will also fill you up because you're like, okay, I need to catch up, making sure I'm drinking enough water. So that should be good. But and also keep in mind, if you are going to sleep pretty early, like say you're coming home by 10:30 and you're like getting to bed by 11, maybe you don't even need that post-Taraweeh snack, right? So maybe on the weekend sometimes you do it, right, if you're like staying up later. But yeah, that's another thing, like really thinking about what your routine is going to look like right now, because our fasts are not going as long as they were when they were summer fasts. We have a chance to actually have a really good sleep schedule this year as well. So just think about that. So maybe you don't need
maybe cut it out.
Maybe
even if you were doing it prior, because the nights were so short and you were sort of trying to get
so you may actually not need it, but just make sure you get that water intake in.
Right. So let's talk about water. So how much should we be drinking during those non-fasting hours?
So you should be drinking the amount that is required in a non-fasting day, right? So say on average, 2 liters is a very kind of like, across the board general recommendation. So say in a day you're drinking 2 liters of water. In a Ramadan fasting day, you should be getting 2 liters as well. And so this is really going to help you, once again, energy levels, but also something that no one talks about is digestive concerns, right? When you start getting all those digestive concerns, that water intake is going to make a huge impact. So consistently over the 30 days, every single day, if it's 2 liters is what your body needs, making sure you're spacing that out in your fasting day.
Right. Okay. Can we talk about spacing it out specifically?
Yeah.
Because I've heard this thing about, if you drink all your water at once, it's just going to flush through basically your system and not really going to help you that much. Is that true? Or
so not necessarily. Okay. And there's also like this, so you need electrolytes to drink. Is that kind of where you're getting at as well? Where it's like,
I think so. Yeah. I think it's sort of
there's
tied
a lot
to
of
the
this.
same.
Yeah. So there's a lot of this messaging. So if you're drinking so it's 2 liters is kind of like how much I consume.
Right.
So at Suhoor time, 500 ml is like about a water bottle, right? 500 ml. At Iftar, when you open your fast, 500 ml. And then I have a liter to catch up basically post-Iftar to bedtime. That's not, like you would have to drink a large amounts of water for it to be very problematic. That's not a large amount of water. Like that should be good. Also in terms of like electrolytes, most people are not extremely active in Ramadan where they're sweating so much where they need to replenish. And most people are eating foods that are high in sodium, you're getting the electrolytes from the food, right? Another thing people don't realize is, so if you see this kind of recommendation, you just start consuming. A lot of ethnicities within the Muslim community are at higher risk of, high blood pressure and things like that. So if you're just taking electrolytes without realizing if you actually need it, you can be going over your sodium intake, right? Because a lot of these electrolytes have sodium. So you have to be mindful. Now, for someone who, say, is eating very healthy and maybe their sodium intake is low and they're active during Ramadan, they may need to actually add in some electrolytes for water. But for the average person, like you can drink your water, like just drink your water. 500 ml is not a large amount where it's going to flush through. I think we where people get that is you feel like you have to go to the washroom more.
Right.
So you feel like, what's the point? No, but you need to drink the water. Even if you're going to the washroom, that's not like a sign that is just leaving your body and you're not kind of getting the benefit.
Right. And I want to do a public service announcement for people with the water bottle thing. Because this is one of the things that drove me nuts last year at the masjid specifically. Part of your Ramadan prep is going to be getting yourself a reusable water bottle. I'm going to hold this one up. Get yourself a reusable one so that you're not taking a sip of a water bottle at the masjid and then leaving it for people to pick up. Oh,
yeah. Like the disposable water?
Yes,
oh, come on.
The plastic water bottles, they're horrible for the environment.
Of course.
And it's super frustrating for people to see like a sip of water taken out of a water bottle and then you've forgotten it because you moved when you were praying or whatever it was.
For sure.
That's the Ramadan prep number one, is make sure you have a reusable water bottle that you're filling up and taking to the masjid with you.
Exactly. And it's helpful because you know how much water you're drinking. So like once you know, like if yours is 500 ml, you're like, all right, I got to drink 4 of these today, right? So it's helpful. It's good to kind of keep track as well.
Right. What about other drinks? Coffee, tea, sugary drinks? What's the recommendation for that during Ramadan?
Yeah, honestly, in Ramadan, I would say cut. So I usually say I'm not restricting, but cut the sugary drinks out in Ramadan. Like we don't have time. Like there's such limited time. Right. Sugary drinks are not adding anything. They're spiking our blood sugars. Right. So cut out the sugary drinks. They're not, it's a cultural thing where it's like, oh, it hydrates you. No, just cut the, right. And then just replace it with water. Right. Coffee and tea, once again, if you are trying to get to bed earlier, which maybe we may be able to this year, having coffee may interrupt your sleep and how deep of a sleep you're going to get, right? So maybe switching over to a tea may be a better option kind of right after iftar. Just being mindful of that because it's going to impact the quality of your sleep. But yeah, once again, if you're staying up through suhoor, you may be able to do a coffee then. Maybe at iftar time, a tea, the caffeine intake is caffeine amount is a little lower, so you should be okay.
Yeah, and there really isn't a better time of the year. Like if this is something that you're trying to eliminate, like the sugary drinks, or you're drinking a lot of coffee and you want to cut it down, you're basically handed this opportunity on a platter in Ramadan to say, this is the time to get rid of whatever bad habit you're trying to get rid of.
Absolutely.
So on that point, after Ramadan, it can be easy to fall into bad habits, but we want to make sure that this Ramadan is kind of a springboard for good habits and a total elimination of the bad habits. So how do we use these healthy habits that we pick up and get rid of the bad habits and continue them into the next year?
For sure. So, I mean, it can go one of two ways. One is you've had a really healthy Ramadan, and I feel like that really motivates you to continue on. And the other side is if you haven't had the best Ramadan, you're like, you don't feel as great at the end of the month. And then you lead into Eid. I think the challenge is Eid, right? Because we're like enjoying ourselves. Eid day becomes Eid week, becomes Eid month.
Yeah, you've identified it.
That's it becomes summer. That's what happens. We got into this and it's really hard. So I think like last 10 days, just taking some time to reset goals again. We're setting goals right now going into Ramadan. What are your goals going into outside of Ramadan, right? One thing that's really helpful is almost doing an intermittent fasting schedule right after Ramadan. So even though even like maybe long-term you're not going to do intermittent fasting, and intermittent fasting works really great for some people, and for others, they kind of need their breakfast meal. But right after post-Ramadan, almost everyone, they can benefit from intermittent fasting because we're not really hungry at this point in the morning. So just set up that kind of schedule. And you have to kind of spend some time thinking about what are your meals going to look like now. Like basically it's a brand new schedule, right? Even though you had a routine before, this is your opportunity to set up a new schedule. So that may look like, okay, we're going to get 2 meals, so lunch and dinner. What are we going to prep? Take some time out. Don't let Eid day become Eid week, it become Eid month, right? It was just kind of lingering. And so you want to kind of make sure you have those set days. I mean, enjoy yourself on Eid. Like I've had like some people be like, okay, what are your recommendations on how to eat healthy on Eid? I'm like, come on, it's Eid. This is the one day where like, enjoy yourself, eat the desserts. Like we have cheesecake for breakfast. Like that's a tradition in our household. So I'm like, after a full month of no fried foods, I'm like, Eid is the day where enjoy yourself, right? Eid is not the day you're trying to restrict and, you know, say no to your mom's dessert and things. Enjoy yourself, but it doesn't need to become Eid week. Like a week later, if you're still having all the desserts, that's a little bit excessive. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. But I think even like last few days, just start really thinking about what are the goals I want to set outside of Ramadan.
Right. Okay, so I want to talk about the Healthy Ramadan Guide, which once again, I'll show people in case you're just tuning into this part of the thing. So this is what it looks like. It's a beautiful book. You wrote it in 2020. I guess you probably wrote it earlier than that, but it was released in 2020.
Released in the pandemic, which was quite an experience because we're like, there was like shipping delays and printing delays. But alhamdulillah, it actually worked out really well because that was the year everyone was at home. And so this book actually brought a lot of families together where it was something exciting that they looked forward to going through. And ever since, and alhamdulillah, it's reached over 35 countries. Wow. So it's been quite amazing to hear people from different cultures be like, okay, we're eating this food, we're enjoying it. And then there's like, you know, the fitness portion of it as well, where it's like being able to do a lot of those exercises. So you're releasing those aches and pains that you get from long salahs and stuff. So alhamdulillah, it has been a really great, experience kind of launching this book.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a nutrition guide. It's got a full meal plan, a grocery list. It's got tons of recipes. And I wrote down some of my favorites. So I told you the overnight oats already. The za'atar whole chicken. I'm Palestinian, so the za'atar thing is like perfect. But even the salmon burger. I really like the salmon burger and the energy bites. We make those every year. So I want to ask you, where can people get the book?
Yeah, so we have our website, thehealthymuslims.com / I think it's book, but we'll include the link. So you can read more about kind of what's included in the book, and we have like a kind of feedback reviews as well there. And then we have the links where you can purchase as well. So you can we can include that there.
Okay. And where can they find out more about you? I mean, we talked about the online platform on Instagram, I think is the big one.
Yeah.
But where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I am at Nutrition by Naz. We have our website, thehealthymuslims.com. And then on the fitness side, there is my husband, Bilal, so he's Stronger with Bilal. So we have kind of our platforms there. And then the website, we also have a Ramadan-only section, so thehealthymuslims.com/Ramadan. And that's where we share some of the recipes, Ramadan-specific tips and things like that is there as well. So that's a really cool page to check out.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I thought this was really beneficial. And as I said, I'm going to go home and we've got a grocery list and stuff that we're going to go home and work on for Ramadan. And again, just closing on that intention, this Ramadan in particular, I think is very well needed for people. Like it's coming at a time where people need this Ramadan. And so if you're thinking about, you know, healthy eating and you're feeling that little bit of guilt and you're feeling that little bit of, I don't think shame is the right word, but if you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about thinking so much about yourself and your food and your family, I think if you go back to the intention of I'm doing this because I want to set myself up to have time in Ramadan, to advocate for people or to do my ibadah or to do whatever it is that I want to do in Ramadan, I think it's a really healthy way of framing that intention and being mindful about what it is, why you're doing this in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually what I on my page today, and that was something I've been struggling with over the past couple of weeks, because it's like this year feels different, right? And you almost feel guilty preparing for Ramadan. But then I was thinking, going back to the intention, I'm like, what do I want my Ramadan to look like? And I want it to look like we have more time to do things. Yeah. And you don't want to spend it being so preoccupied with what are we eating, right? And so that's where the preparation comes in. So if you tie that intention to that preparation so that it allows us to do more, we link our physical body to the spiritual self, then these things become easier for us to do, right? So inshallah, yeah, I think it's so important to end off on that intention that, you know, we're not talking about the superficial aspects of food. It's actually, inshallah, going to help us fuel our bodies so that we are able to, inshallah, have a good energized Ramadan so we can do more.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.